Hi guys, this is Wave 618. This is a tutorial video for elliottwave, and particularly in this video we're going to be focusing on what's known as a diagonal pattern. As well as the diagonal, we're also going to touch on another pattern called a 1-2-1-2. Yeah, so these are slightly more complex than the elliottwave patterns that we've been talking about in previous videos so far. But nonetheless, it's very, very important, and it's important to look out for these patterns just because it can really change your wave count. This video, as I say, will be slightly more complex, and more importantly, you'll see a lot of elliottwave traders, whether it's on YouTube or just talking about it in general, and you'll see that they're often making mistakes with regards to diagonals. Yeah, it's a common misconception that a diagonal is a corrective pattern, when in fact it is an impulsive pattern. It's an impulsive wave. So I'm going to go into that in more detail in this video. So first of all, diagonal, as you can see here, it's also known as a wedge. And the reason it's called a wedge is because the wave count, the pattern, is converging. So if we draw some trend lines just connecting the highs, like so, and then another line connecting the lows, we can see that these two lines, the upper trend line, the lower trend line, they're actually converging. They're getting closer together, just like within a just like a wedge. Yeah, so that's why we call it a wedge. Now it's very important, because it is an impulse wave, we label it with numbers rather than letters. As I've mentioned in my previous tutorials, corrective patterns are labeled with letters, whilst impulse waves are labeled with numbers. So I've seen time and time again elliottwave traders making this very big mistake where they'll label the waves A, B, C, D, E rather than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'll recognize the wedge shape, but they'll call it an A, B, C, D, E, and then from there you expect a huge impulse in the opposite direction. What I'm saying is this is an impulse. You'll then see a correction, not a huge movement, just a correction before a continuation in the same direction. Yeah, that's depending on where we see this diagonal. If this diagonal is the final wave in a larger pattern, then it will be slightly different. I'll come to that shortly. But it's very important to understand whether it's corrective or impulsive. And as I say, it's always considered an impulse wave. Now, the subwave count, this is where it becomes confusing, and this is why people make this common mistake of calling it a corrective pattern. The subwave count is 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. That means each wave is made of 3 waves. Now that's very confusing, because obviously usually in an impulse wave we have 5 up, 3 down, 5 up, 3 down, and then 5 up. But actually in the case of a diagonal, each leg is made up of 3 legs, yeah, on a lower degree. So wave 1 is made up of 3 legs, wave 2 is 3 legs, wave 3 is 3 legs, wave 4 is 3 legs, and wave 5 is 3 legs. Okay, so this makes it confusing. This makes it look like a triangle, because obviously with triangles it's the same subwave count. It's a 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. However, in a triangle, I'll explain shortly why it's very different to a diagonal or a wedge. So let's just remove that one. Also very important to notice, wave 4 overlaps with wave 1. Now, as we've mentioned in my first video on elliottwave, I mentioned that one of the key rules to an impulse wave is that wave 4 does not overlap with wave 1. However, I made that extra comment, which is part of the rule, that the exception is in a diagonal where wave 4 can overlap with wave 1. Alright, so how do we differentiate a wedge from a triangle? Alright, so this is how we do it. As you can see in the wedge, both lines are going in the same direction. They're both going up. Alternatively, they could be both coming down. Yeah. In a triangle, you'll never get both lines going in the same direction. You may get one going flat whilst one goes up. Alternatively, one will go up whilst the other one comes down. And then the other scenario is the bottom line is flat whilst the top line comes down. Yeah, these are your scenarios for a triangle. You will never get both lines going in the same direction. You will never get this. Yeah, as soon as both lines are going down or both lines are going up, we call it a wedge. Okay, this is the key difference. And why is it important? Well, it's important because after you see an impulse, you can expect a small correction. What I see time and time again is, let's say for example, we see a big impulsive wave coming down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They will call this a triangle. This is a common mistake we see. And they'll label it A, B, C, D, E. Yeah. So as I say, when you use letters, these are used for corrective patterns. So what they're saying is that this is in fact corrective, and then from here they are saying that we can expect a large 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, forming a new low with a new impulse leg going down. They're saying this diagonal is corrective. This is completely wrong. Yeah. If I saw 5 waves coming down like this, yes, that's impulsive. But if I see 5 waves going up, then to me, this is an impulse leg. Now I'll explain what I could expect from here. For example, it could be part of an ABC. For example, A, B, C, where A is an impulse leg, B is corrective, and then C is an impulse leg. This is why it's important to make the differentiation. People who make the mistake will see that price is going to come down from here and form a new low, when in fact it's just going to make a retracement before making a new high. Yeah. Okay, so let's just take that off. So there I've illustrated the importance of differentiating or labeling it correctly as an impulse wave. Yeah, I see it time and time again where people are calling it an ABCDE, but it is in fact a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as I say, 4 overlaps with wave 1, which does mean that it's not a regular impulse wave. And the waves are contracting, so typically they're getting smaller. Now, another pattern I want to talk about is what we call a 1, 2, 1, 2. So if I just draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves up, what we see in a 1, 2, 1, 2 is we see this initial 1, 2 on the larger degree, and then on a one lower degree we see a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, up to here. So this is on a lower degree. Let's just change that to, that'll do. So we've changed the wave count. So wave 3 is made up of this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now as you can see, this 1, 2, 1, 2 looks similar to the diagonal 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it can be very misleading. When you reach this stage in a diagonal, just be careful you're not in a 1, 2, 1, 2 pattern, because the difference is if you're in a 1, 2, 1, 2, price will come to here and then it will go much higher to make a wave 3. Whilst if you're in a diagonal pattern, price won't go much higher, and and in fact it will stay within this trend line here. So for example, if we drew a trend line here, if it was a diagonal it would end here. Yeah, but in fact it went higher, which means it was a 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 to finish wave 3, and then it makes a wave 4, and then a wave 5 up. Okay, as I say, it's getting a little bit more complex now, but it doesn't get much more complex than this. So yeah, let's just clean this up slightly. And so that's your 1 2 1 2. Basically you get a 1 2 on the larger degree and a 1 2 on the smaller degree before a much more bigger move up. Yeah, so it's something to look out for, that 1 2 1 2. Okay, now whilst we're on the topic, I've just mentioned about how we can label the waves slightly differently for the lesser degrees. I will just touch on that because I know I haven't mentioned it in my previous videos. So this is actually what we call a submillennium. Yeah. Now as we go down this scale here, we're going down according to lesser degrees. Yeah. So it just helps with clarity when you're reading a chart. Say you're reading someone else's technical analysis interpretation and they've labeled their Elliott wave. You can see that what you get with supermillennium at the top. So you get a circle around a large number, and then 1 degree less you'll get a large number in brackets, and then 1 further degree less you'll get a number without any brackets or any circle. Yeah. After that you get a grand supercycle. This is basically Roman numerals in a circle. Yeah. Then you get Roman numerals in a bracket, and then you get Roman numerals on their own. Following on from there you get the primary, which is basically a smaller number in a circle. Yeah. Then you get a smaller number in brackets, and then you get a smaller number by itself, and you can probably guess what's next. It's basically a smaller Roman numeral in a circle. This will be a smaller Roman numeral in a bracket, and this is just a smaller Roman numeral by itself, and so on and so forth. Yeah, this is just how we label waves of a lesser degree, and it adds, it provides clarity when we're really looking at the chart. So that's just a little bit about how we label. One other thing I would just like to touch on in this video, because I know I haven't mentioned it in my previous videos, wave 2 and wave 4 are the corrective waves in an impulse leg. Now, what we often see is that the complexity of the waves often alternates between wave 2 and wave 4. So for example, if we see a simple correction, which is like a zigzag down, so an A, B, C down to make wave 2, we can expect wave 4 to be a lot more complex. And this is the typical scenario. We usually see a simple retracement for wave 2, and wave 4 often drags on for a long time. It's often the longest wave that we see in the whole 5 waves up. And you get much more complex patterns. It's very hard to trade within it because you don't know what kind of pattern is forming. You'll often get what looks like a triangle forming, and that will then turn into a zigzag. So it can become very complex. Typically, the duration from wave 0 to wave 3 will be equal to the wave from the end of wave 3 to the end of wave 5. Yeah, and that just shows you how wave 5 is often the longest wave. Yeah, because wave 5 is an impulse, which doesn't take very long. So the majority of the time of this second half of the impulse is spent in a wave 4. As I say, it's usually quite complex as opposed to this simple retracement here. This is not a rule, by the way, but it's just something we generally see, and it's well regarded amongst Elliott wave analysts. So that's something to keep in mind. If you see a complex wave 2, you can expect a simple wave 4 in the sense that it'll be quite quick, it'll be nice and regular. But if you see this very messy wave 2, very hard to interpret, then expect a more simple wave 4. Yeah, that's why it's useful. It tells you whether wave 4, once you've seen wave 2 form, you can then determine whether wave 4 is going to be long and confusing, or whether it's going to be nice and simple. As I say, most of the time it's long and confusing. Alright guys, so as I say, slightly more complex this video, but if you're getting the gist of this, then you're a long way to learning Elliott wave. This, as I say, in particular diagonals, is poorly understood amongst even the better Elliott wave analysts. Yeah, I see it time and time again, people making this rookie error. It generally requires reading textbooks to understand it fully. It catches a lot of people out. Don't let it catch you out. It can save you a lot of money just by understanding it and being aware that this is in fact an impulse wave and not a corrective wave. So one thing I've realized I've not touched on is where we find these diagonal patterns. So I've actually mentioned here we can have a leading diagonal or an ending diagonal depending on where it is. So you'll never get a diagonal. First of all, it's an impulse wave, so it's either going to be in wave 1, 3 or 5. Yeah, because these are our impulse waves. You will, as a rule, you'll never get a diagonal in wave 3. It's either in wave 1 or wave 5. If it occurs in wave 1, we call it a leading diagonal because it's at the beginning of the whole move up. If it's in wave 5, we call it an ending diagonal because it's in the final leg of the whole move up. Alternatively, if we have a zigzag coming down, so A, B, C, as I've mentioned on my tutorial on zigzags, wave A is impulsive, B is corrective, C is impulsive. So waves A and C can both be a zigzag. So if it's in A, we call it a leading diagonal because it's the start of the move, whilst if it's in C, the final leg of the move, we call it an ending diagonal. Yeah, so it's as simple as that, very self-explanatory. So that's it really. We've got our leading and ending diagonals. These are where it occurs, wave 1, 5, A or C. We've talked about 1, 2, 1, 2 patterns, which can often be misinterpreted for a diagonal up until this point here. And we've talked a little bit about how to label the waves on all the different degrees. Alright guys, so I'll leave it at that and look forward to further videos. Alright.